Hi everyone, it's Kasia from Tarot Map, and this is yet another installment in my Inspired Tarot Map series. And in this time, I'm hosting Lara Veleda Vesta, and Lara is an amazing woman, and I'm so excited, Lara, that I got you on the series. Hello.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here. We've been trying to do this for a long time, so this feels really great.
I'm really happy. So Lara, you're a writer, you're an artist, you have created the Oracle deck, the Mundivas Oracle deck. You are a healer, you're a teacher, you're a mother, you're a patient, you're a person who seeks, you're a seeker, you're basically a witch. So a lot of aspects of your beings, can be mentioned here, like for all of us. But I got to see what you do. I think I met you first on Instagram, through Instagram. And just the way you wrote, it was so soulful, it was so calming. And then I got to see, I did your ancestral class, and it was like really fascinating. And yeah, I was just going like, wow, I just love how you show up for this community online, in Instagram or here on YouTube. Maybe you don't have a channel, but you put a lot of videos out on your website, on your YouTube, on your Instagram. And yeah, I was just always fascinated. So I made myself a promise. Then yeah, I have to get you on Inspired Tarot Map because I'm inspired and I want to share you. So whoever doesn't know you can get a chance to know you through this meeting. Can you tell me about your ancestry, like where you come from, like what's your lineage?
Oh yes. Well, my most recent, I'm American, but my most recent ancestors from Europe are, my grandfather came from Norway. All of my ancestors are immigrants most over the course of the last 50 years, so fairly recent, but I do have ancestors coming from as far back as the 1500s, so quite some time ago, but primarily from Scandinavia and then other parts of Northern Europe, the British Isles. That's my dominant, when I did my DNA, that's my dominant ancestry.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to ask if you have done it, the test.
Yes.
I'm like dying to do it. I haven't done it yet, but has it changed? Like, I've heard that the percentage changes. Depends on, I think, how many members of your family are there, or I'm not sure how
it's the sample size. So there, it's DNA is so wonderful and mysterious. It's nonlinear, so you are not going to inherit the same amount as any siblings you might have, which is pretty incredible. You are not going to inherit directly from your parents in like exact percentages. So I might have DNA that no one else in my lineage will carry, which is pretty cool too. But you, of course, can't inherit things that your parents don't have. So as they increase the sample size, when I first did my DNA, they only had a sample size of about 3,000 people. And then it increased exponentially to 16,000. So the percentages changed, and that's where like my British Isles ancestry really got bumped up. And I have Irish on both sides, and also Scandinavian on both sides. So that's the dominant people. But I feel the strongest relationship to my Nordic ancestry because my grandfather was from Norway, and I have a lot of family there still. And he was very much steeped in the myth and the lore of Norway. And so I grew up with those myths and with this animist ideology that he carried with him.
Yeah. So it came kind of through the ancestry that you got into the Nordic mythology. That was mostly, so it's not like one morning you woke up and you just went,
no,
Nordic myths.
It was very much imbued into my childhood. But all of the myths, all of the fairy tales, my origin story begins in those stories for sure. In the stories of the living world.
So I've got a question, which before I ask it, I want to read something that you wrote. So I'm going to read you, Lara. I just found it on I think it was your recent post about the dark goddess. So you wrote, in myth, we learn the purpose of trial, the function of death, and the necessary mysteries we inhabit through human lifetime. Myth contains the threads of ritual secret, how to prepare for initiation into those mysteries, how to survive the descent into the underworld, and how to claim your new status, what ceremonies aid integration. This we have forgotten. And I really resonate with this, because looking around and living in our modern world, we definitely have forgotten this connection to myth. And even though myth is always there, it seems to be like this, somewhere. And how can we reconnect? How can we actually bring this myth into our daily lives in this modern world, which is fairly disconnected from nature and from magical thinking and from creative thinking, and pushed back into the efficient thinking and providing the results? How can we come back to like this myth, and how can we live it? How to bring it, like into the bones, so it's not just a book on the shelf. And in the older times, people used to do myth and ritual. How can we do it?
Well, that's a huge question.
It is. I'm sorry.
No, I love that question though, because that's really what my work has been so much about, is learning the myths. We all have stories that we're attracted to, and maybe we got those stories from modern culture. Maybe they came through Disney. The last Moon on Patreon, I told the Moon story. I told the story of Rapunzel from the perspective of the witch. And that was an example of me taking a story that had captivated me as a child. And I'd heard that story in a number of different forms, mostly from very sanitized modern versions. And then following that myth back into its origin and finding, the grim version of that tale and reading it in translation, of course, and then really starting to imagine that myth as part of my daily life and thinking about the characters in the myth and bringing them into my consciousness and bringing them into my rituals. I think that's how we start, is we follow. We all love stories. When I was teaching at Pacific University, when I would tell a story, I would have a room full of, wild, modern, tech-savvy 20-year-olds, and they would not care about anything I was saying at all when it came to, writing instruction. But the second I started telling a story, they went quiet. Because we know when someone's telling a story that we're in the presence of something great and ancient, and it lives inside of us. It's not separate from us. And so I would say, for anyone who wants to bring a more mythic awareness into their lives, follow the story that you love. Like, what story when you were a child really woke you and appealed to you? What story has been in the back of your consciousness? What movie did you watch 1,000 times when you were little? For me, it was The Never Ending Story, which is a movie all about myth.
I watched Dirty Dancing. Does it count?
I'm sure there's an archetype in there for you.
But I loved the Grimm's brother. Was it Grimm's? It was the other guy, the Danish one, the storyteller as well. There were Grimm brothers and
Hans Christian Andersen.
And Hans Andersen. I think it was A Little Mermaid. Is it his story?
Yes.
But the old version again, because I'm glad you mentioned this, because all the stories got also beautified, like our bodies and our looks, and the old Little Mermaid. I remember reading it as a young girl, and I bawled my eyes. Like, I couldn't believe it didn't finish with a happy ending. Like, I was like,
no.
Like, what? She didn't get that prince. He married somebody else and she lost everything. Like, what? like, I remember I was distraught, like, but you know, you take it as a child. Maybe that maybe that really skewed me, I don't know, because now I'm love dark and death and not happy endings really. But it's interesting that yeah, you're right, we all have those stories. And also I think, you know, being a card reader, dealing with art, making stories from cards, like connecting dots through like this beauty, that's like another level. If somebody doesn't feel maybe connected to a story itself, like, oh, I don't like fairy tales, like maybe don't block it, because you can probably find the story in anywhere really. It doesn't have to be necessarily spoken word.
And to know that those stories aren't the only stories. The stories come through us. We live the story. You know, this idea that we are somehow not capable of receiving divine information and creating new stories to live by. Like, who made that up? That's ridiculous. We are all so powerful. We are making this world right now. And so the stories are coming through you. And absolutely, you know, divination is a story. It is a story, and it's both a mythic consciousness coming through you, and then an awareness of symbol, which stories are symbolic language. That is the function of story, to speak to us on that unconscious level so that we can start to integrate things and make them conscious. You know, I love, there's a quote by Jung who he talks about the more of myth we can integrate, the more rich and full our life becomes, because we are allowing for this expansive consciousness that moves back and forward across the spiral of time. And that's exactly what divination does. It moves back and forward across the spiral of time and brings us into that mythic awareness. So I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Oh, that's a beautiful way of describing divination in our world. Because I know, like, you know, one of these inputs for this particular series was to show that tarot cards or oracle cards, they don't have to be used for divination, that cards can be used for many other magical undertakings, for creative thinking, for story making, for creating new gods and goddesses, because it also comes like with creation of new myths. We can create new gods and goddesses, like things. Like we're expanding as human beings, I think, and we also are very expansive, and maybe everything already is and has been, and I don't know, will be, whatever will be already was, who knows. It's just this big spiral. So yeah, but when I think of, we had this little chat before we got online, because as I mentioned, you actually are a teacher as well, and you mentioned you taught at university, but online you've got this amazing Wild Soul School where you offer courses but by donation, and you also, I don't know if you're still running any classes that people can join. You run the Coven, right?
Yes, I have.
Can you tell a little bit about the school itself, and then I ask my question?
Sure, yes. The Wild Soul School is an online school. It has, I think there's 6 self-study courses that people can join with no financial obligation. I just ask for donations, and people can donate via Patreon, or I have a 501c3 umbrellaing the Wild Soul School, so they can donate there if they want a tax deduction. And the school, the classes are in ritual practice, ancestral connection, self-initiation. Oh gosh, what else?
Runes, the runic feminine.
The runic feminine, personal empowerment, and I think I'm forgetting one possibly.
Something with ritual, but 13, was it?
Yeah,
something
there's
with
the 13-day ritual practice. And then I also, ongoing, I run 2 classes that I do ask for payment, because anytime I have to show up in person, because I'm a person living with a chronic illness, I do ask for compensation, because it is challenging for me to be in a place at a specific time. So the Witch Wound Healing Circle, which will start up again, we kind of run in I've noticed it's about 3-month cycles where we'll meet for 3 times and then take a little break. But we're starting again at the beginning of November, and I'll have a guest coming on talking about ecological grief, which will be really powerful.
Oh, that's such an interesting subject.
Yes, and that circle's been pretty incredible. And then I have the Coven Invisible, which is a patron coven, and patrons receive ritual kits every quarter. So I just put together a little tiny one for this quarter. And they receive membership in the Witch Wound Healing Circle. And then I'll also be starting the Runic Feminine Live Gnosis group, which the Runic Feminine is quite a commitment. It's a 33-week practice with the runes. And I ran this all in, it was 2017, 2018. But we started doing live Gnosis circles where we'd meet once a week, because you work with a particular rune every week to really get to know it as a being. And then we would come together and share Gnosis. And so that was really incredible. And that will be available for Coven members. And then I think that between that and the Witch Wound Healing Circle, that will be me kind of being at capacity. But as you know, I offer a ton of stuff on Patreon too. My patrons are sustaining the creation. I'm writing 2 books right now, and I make ritual practices for patrons, and then offer the moon stories, the mythic tellings, which are supposed to be every moon, but they're not. They're sporadic, but
fluctuate like the moon.
So, like the moon, and like myth. But it's all interconnected, the school and Patreon. But people can come in and check out the school. There's I'm really committed to access because I live with a chronic illness, and because I've had periods of really extreme disability where I've not had financial resources. I pretty much let anyone into anything if they just ask. But I do have a lot of things that are available without financial obligation for that reason, so people can come in and have access. And the hope is, and so far this has been what has played out, is that the people who can pay help to carry the work for those who cannot. And so we're a community, which is really so powerful and so rich to find this integrative community in the interwebs.
But also I think, because you show up and with this openness and vulnerability and whatever you share, it's so helpful, I think, especially for people with, as you call it, disability or illness, chronic illness. You have such a unique approach. We'll come to that about the illness, but just finishing off with the runes and ancestry. So also with the runes, like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start, because you come with, you come to the subject runes, like you have books on runes, you have decks on runes, you have like whatever on runes, teleseminars about runes, but then I came across your work through you. Actually, I met one of your teachers, Ingrid Kincaid. That's how you pronounce her name. And both of you, I was just like, I still haven't, done any work with runes, but I found you fascinating, both of you, and so original and such a unique approach to the subject when it's more experiential, really. I'm an astrologer. I studied like experiential astrology. It is something like this, that you stand in the circle and you actually experience the planet within your own chart. And your approach to runes just seems so similar. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about runes, and then we get to the cultural appropriation. It keeps being pushed back, but I just really want to hear, like, how we know that your grandfather shared the love for the Nordic culture, but how did you got to work with runes the way you do? And maybe you can describe the way you work with them, so for people who don't know.
Of course, yes. When I was a child, my mom had a pendant that she had brought back from Norway that had runes on it. And I loved that pendant. It had a spinning wheel on one side and runes on the other side. And I wore that pendant all through high school, all through college. I had no idea what it was. And then when I was, I think, a senior in college, I had a friend of mine who was studying German take the pendant and actually tell me what this was on here, because I just felt this kinship. And it was a pewter pendant. It was probably made for tourism or something. It wasn't like ancient and significant in that way, but it said in runes. It actually translated into Old Icelandic and said Lake, River, Mountain, Norway. That's what it said in runes. And so that was my first exposure. But I didn't come to the runes until 2013. And that was when I met Ingrid and started taking her classes. And oh boy, the runes. So my view of the runes is that they're living beings. They're fragments of the web of weirds. Their origin story is that they come from the well of the Norns, which is the well of Earth, which is everything that ever was, is in that well. And the Odin hung upside down on the world tree for 9 days and nights. He's a sacrificial god. There's lots of evidence of him sacrificing himself. And it says in the Eddas that he took up the runes. So he actually, and this was in a Gnosis meditation, I saw him rip the runes out of this feminine well of all that was. And so the runes are vibrational fragments of the web of weird, which weird is everything, W-Y-R-D, everything that is in the universe is made of weird. So you can think of it as a matrix of energy or light fibers or whatever. I mean, when I close my eyes, I can see the vibrations of weird running through everything. And that is what runes are. But they are alive. All of weird is alive. And so each of them is a living being. And when I started working with them, they kicked my ass. Like, everything I tell people when they come to the runes, and this has been my experience and the experience of many others, like, if there's anything in your life that's out of integrity, they are going to pull you into integrity. Ancient beings have no patience for the stories that we tell ourselves about how we have to do this way, or why we, yeah, exactly. So within 6 months, I lost my home. We had custodial chaos with all 3 of our children. I have 3 children in a blended family. They all came to live with us. Like, they had been half-time here, half-time there, but they all came to live with us full-time. I was suddenly had to quit my job and was homeschooling. I mean, it was just this explosion of what I now see was a big realignment. And they've not ever left me. They have been with me ever since. So I work with the runes consistently. I draw them. I do divination with them in that I cast the runes and then draw webs of weird with the runes in the cast. So, and then read the weird itself. And that process has been so powerful. I can't say enough about how they've transformed my life and my work, and really continue to bring me into integrity. They are dispassionate. They don't have a lot of compassion. They're so ancient that they, and in fact, I've done a lot of research too, independent research about the runes, and we don't really know where the runes came from. Scientists don't, archaeologists don't. They did not originate just as an alphabet. They come from very deep culture in old Europe, so ancient culture. They come from, there's evidence of what they call pre-runic writing, even into the Neolithic. So really, really old beings that have been with humans for a very long time. And when I meet people who encounter the runes for the first time, they often say that they remember them. Like, I just had a woman write to me the other day and say, I'm so happy that I found this work because I remember them. They're in me. And that's how the runic feminine originated, was this idea that, yeah, you can get a book that will tell you what the runes mean. And we do have ancient rune poems that are written in Old Icelandic and Old Anglo-Saxon that you can, they're written as kennings though, so kind of like riddles. And so the meaning is more impressive than it is like
do this or
prescriptive. Yeah. This means this. We don't get that with the runes, and that's why I really encourage people to build a personal relationship with them, and to ask them questions and to let them work in your life, because they will change it. They will change your life, and they will transform you. And it is such a rewarding relationship to come into this vast lineage tradition that extends all the way back again to the Neolithic.
Yeah. So would you like, when you work with runes, do you pull runes by chance, or you kind of now resonate with them so you know which one, like how do you do it for yourself?
I do. So we get in some of the old lore in the Eddas and the sagas, we get information about kind of let's see, Tacitus wrote Germania, about the Germanic tribes, and so in all of this ancient literature, you can kind of piece together some of the relationships with the runes that our ancestors had. So I like to work with I make runes. I make rune sets, and so I do have several sets that I work with at home, and I do cast them generally on white linen. That's kind of the traditional way, and C has to do with the order in which they appear, and then how the shapes can join, and then I draw a web based on that, which that's kind of my unique form of divination, because what happens when you put the runes together in a web, which I have a rune web tutorial in the Runic Feminine, I think I made just a quick one for other people who want to take on this practice.
Yeah.
Because the runes make the runes. So you get this multi-layered effect when you create a web, and it really is the weird. You see then, you know, weird is constantly changing. It's being spun and woven with every action that we have, but you can get a snapshot of the weird for right now or for a particular situation, much in the way you might with tarot
Cards,
reading.
yeah.
So that's
fascinating.
how I
Wow.
work with them.
Thank you for sharing. And now to the question of the cultural appropriation. Because let's say I don't know, maybe I do, but let's say I don't have any Nordic ancestry. Can I use runes? Like, what are your thoughts of on cultural appropriation? Because there's a lot of discussion in our community, tarot community, healers community, witches, a lot of heated discussions often. I think we're still learning how to hold the conversation and how to learn to discuss things. We don't have to agree with everything, but online comments are sometimes so aggressive, and I'm just like, can't deal with it, basically. So I skip the discussion altogether. But I think it is an important discussion, and in the face of how we have access to everything now, like, what are your thoughts on, can I use runes, being not necessarily connected to the culture who used to use them? If we know for sure, we don't know, but kind of from what we know, what do you think?
Well, I've had to learn a lot about cultural appropriation because of my process with my first book, which is the Moon Divas Guidebook. When I first wrote that book, I had created illustrations that I thought were multicultural and had included some practices from my collaborator. That book came out of a series of workshops that I taught a long time ago.
Just show a few images, maybe, just if people don't know.
Yes. So this is from the revised. I took out all of the images that were appropriative. And the reason that they were appropriative is not because I drew them, because when we were visiting at the beginning before the recording, yes, that's Nerthus. Yes. Oh, and Freya.
Okay, I stop because it's distracting.
So cultural appropriation exists where someone from a culture that is dominant takes something from a culture that has been traditionally oppressed and uses it for their own purposes, specifically to gain either capital or influence or any sort of social status. If you are taking something from a culture that is not your own and using it and gaining from it, that is the definition of cultural appropriation. So my book, even though it was self-published and not selling a whole bunch, I was earning money off of that book. And I had people, you know, coloring those images and showing them and sharing them with other people. I was earning from that. So it was appropriative. And I withdrew the book and I made a bunch of changes, and I've revised that book 3 times now. And instead of having images from cultures that are not my own, what I did was I used my attraction to particular aspects of other cultures as a key into my own lineage. Because as a person of European descent, I have to work much harder. I don't have unbroken lineage traditions to draw from. Here in North America, there's a lot of really beautiful indigenous cultures that have, you know, been disrupted, decimated, hurt by colonization, but yet still have unbroken lineage traditions.
Yes.
That is not something I have the luxury of between, you know, witch burnings and immigration. A lot of my traditions have,
Christianity.
yes, Christianity. A lot of my traditions have been hidden. That is the very definition of the word occult, is hidden. So we look for those keys, and I started to be able to find them and piece them together. What I do in my own home is my business. What you do in your own home is your business. You can research any tradition you want. You can practice with whatever gods or goddesses choose you. If the runes are calling to you, by all means, answer the call. See what they have to say to you. But, you know, to be out there selling runes, I mean, so runes are a little bit different too, because they come from a dominant culture. The difficult thing with the runes is that they were themselves appropriated by white supremacists and used to further the agenda of white supremacy. So part of my working with the runes is trying to reclaim those symbols from that psychological horror that is white supremacy, which is very challenging. And challenges a lot of people when they meet the runes, because some of them come into contact with those symbols. So that is a little bit of a different, there's a different power dynamic there. But really to understand that we're going to be called to different spiritual paths, and to answer those calls sometimes is going to require us to divest from capitalism in terms of our spirituality and really allow for the privacy of those interactions. And there are many ways to approach cultures respectfully. There are many ways to allow for people to educate us about those cultures. And I would also say, though, if you don't know your own people and where you come from, that probably you need to find out, because I think that in our recent history, there's a lot of reasons why people of European descent don't, and that's what I call the witch wound, don't go into their own lineage traditions, and instead go to traditions that are maybe more easily accessible, and that we come from a dominant culture and we can just take what we want. But that is cultural appropriation. So.
That's a great distinction, because in my books, like, it's not black and white, but by what we saw on, you know, lots of plastic shamans and just overusing other people's cultures, learning for tobacco from somebody who is genuinely sharing the teachings and then charging big bucks for you know, exclusive retreats for white people, basically, and sharing not your story in a way. It's totally got out of hand. But then on the other hand, when it gets on to the other extreme, then I can see in a lot of people now that people are afraid to, for example, research something or use other divination systems, because they feel like they're appropriating or they're not respecting, that it's not their culture. And that's also kind of a little bit sad, because if we really go back with the ancestry and not just look at our bloodline or recent few generations, kind of, we all the same bloody hell.
Well, we are all human, you know, and this isn't to say, this is not, we're all one love. This is, we live in contemporary culture, and you know, racism is real, and cultural appropriation is real, and oppression is real. However, In the Ancestral Connection class, I came upon an article about the universal common ancestor. Everyone alive today has one common ancestor. And to know that, I mean, we share, I think it's 3/4 of our DNA. I'm probably misquoting that, but I like to think of that particular equation. We share 3/4 of our DNA with trees too. You know, we are part of this world. We all are. And you're right, to shut ourselves off from exploration is a consequence of, you know, things being so far out of balance for so long. And what we do in our own homes, or in, you know, small collectives that we're not profiting from, that is a really different thing from, you know, saying I am a, you know, shaman in this tradition that's not my own, and now I'm charging you $3,000 for a weekend so that you too can become a shaman, you know.
Yeah, and you get a certificate of
right,
amazing abilities
shamanism
gained over the weekend.
That's
Thank
right.
you. You're a specialist now. Go
Yes,
off and
right.
multiply.
Because that's all it takes is one weekend.
Yeah. I know it gets really funny, but then also there is the question of inclusion of, you know, diversity, and it's such a like, it just, the borders are not really like straightforward, because then let's say you do a goddess deck, especially from many cultures, so when they see a goddess deck, they don't just see, let's say, Hindu goddesses or just, I don't know, Greek goddesses for the European culture, but so that they can find also Jewish women could find Shekinah, or, you know, Black women could find their depiction, that when they look at the deck, they see themselves included as well. So it's not just, let's say, white goddesses, or, and that also makes like sense to me. But then, yeah, when does it become like, it's hard. I think it's just such a subject when it's not hard line.
I had that same question with the guidebook, and what I came to was, you know, so I had a class, I was in a PhD program in women's spirituality at the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I had a class called Building Conscious Allyship, which was with this amazing woman who actually went and started her own school. Her school is called Liberation Spring, which is incredible. I recommend all of her courses. She is brilliant. And that class just opened my eyes that many of my efforts at inclusion were actually just self-serving. I was doing my best, but truly what was needed was for, you know, what I took, my first step was to really root myself in my own ancestry, and to know that I'm not for everyone. I can't be for everyone. And if I want to create a multicultural goddess deck, then I probably should invite other artists from those cultures to contribute to that goddess deck, so that it's not just my interpretation of, again, if I'm painting it for my own self, but if I'm selling it and I'm not part of those cultures, then I'm benefiting from something that I'm truly not integrated into. And that's where it becomes really complicated. And we're in a time where we do have to be extra respectful. And I think that being able to have the conversation at all, you know, I always say I'm super imperfect at this. I am just learning. This was just brought into my awareness in 2015. This is not something I've been doing my whole life. So let's give it another 20, 30 years and see where we end up. I think we'll end up in a really interesting place if we can have the conversation without shutting each other down. You know?
Exactly. Because I think you're right. We a lot of us come with good intentions, but as the old saying goes, road to hell is paved with good intentions. But I agree. Like, I think the conversation that is happening, the awareness that comes to, you know, to play, we haven't been talking about it before. A lot of suppressed cultures and non-dominant cultures couldn't speak up before. So there is the need for, definitely a need for conversation. And I think that's really brilliant. And also for education. And I'm not talking about free emotional labor here, but definitely a conversation that also is inclusive and not like you can't do it and, you know, kind of blocking
Yes.
everybody else out, because that doesn't really bring any change. And we have dealt with those methods before, and it's not good.
One of my favorite resources that I point people to for cultural appropriation is a small video. It's on a website called Everyday Feminism, which they have great educational materials. It's like, I don't know, less than 10 minutes. And it's what is cultural appropriation is the title of the video. And it's wonderful because it just breaks it down very simply. And I think that it was very helpful to me. I was able to carry that forward into my own work, and you know, we just make an effort and we keep trying and we offer each other resources and we educate each other and we put one foot in front of the other. But I do think for people of European descent, one of the things that is very much a preventative of cultural appropriation is to root into your own lineage, to find your people, to start to look not just at, you know, kind of the shiny, pretty books that are out there about like Celtic spirituality, but to really, Slavic spirituality, which, but to really start to look at the root, to look at the lore, to look at the myth, to look at the fragments. One of the resources I've found for learning about pre-Christian traditions has been the Christian penitentials, where the bishops went through and said, you know, all of these things are prohibitive. This was like in the 1100s. So, you know, most pagan and heathen traditions were not written down. They were oral traditions. So finding those fragments for me has been such a powerful way to, I feel very at home in my ancestral traditions. I've not had, you know, where I was so spiritually hungry before and looking constantly outside to try and feed myself. Now I feel like I've come home. I have a path that's taking me home.
So beautifully. It's actually a similar story to my own story. I think a lot of us probably went through a similar story when you go through this like huge hunger and you feel it with, you know, Native American approach. And even saying Native American is just stupid because it's not one approach. It's like so separated for, So, but like, let's just call it in quotation. I mean, like the converted marks that Native American culture, any Hawaiian culture, you know, all this kind of, so I can see how many our culture, how much damage was done also to the non-dominant cultures, and at the same time maybe now you know, they have a chance to blossom and like return to the rightful owners in a sense, but and then can be shared of course, but from the right center. But now going back to Poland, I physically went back to my ancestors in some way. I mean, I'm still curious who my ancestors are. I don't know anybody from my father's side, so I'm kind of just stuck on one side. I know that we kind of Eastern Poland, but I just hope I'm not just Polish and that's it. I will see. I'm going to do the test. But anyway, let's move on. Another part of your amazing self that you share very openly and vulnerably is that illness part, because in the recent years especially, and I didn't want to make it into the illness story because there's so much more to what you share than just this, but I think it's a very important work because there's so much I call it just a wrong approach to illness and wrong approach to death, and wrong in a sense very diminishing and not allowing us to grow with such a big part of life. Like everybody goes through it. It's not something that, oh, for you, Lara, it's just you. How did it happen to you? You know, like each of us is sick and each of us gets through bigger or lower, bigger or smaller deaths in our lives. And you have been going and living with chronic illness for the last few years. You had to change your life, and you are showing can you hear me?
I lost you.
I could hear my voice.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, you're back.
The computer got illness now.
Yes, that's right.
Sorry, Apple, you'll be just, you can deal with us. So the chronic illness, and I think you said the chronic illness is, you said it in one of your interviews or in one of your writings, I can't remember now, that you found this is your best mindfulness practice. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us just a short story and how you got to embrace the illness in this way, like wise woman way, I call it, but like how, like what happened, you know, because not everybody gets the strength, and I think we all have the strength, but was it a moment that you just woke up and went, okay, this is how I'm going to treat my illness, or how did it happen?
Well, I was sick for 9 years, progressively ill, getting more and more ill, and was misdiagnosed, and then I was accurately diagnosed but had no treatment, no access to treatment. And there were a lot of other factors. It's a big, long story, but the result was I spent about 2 years homebound and primarily bedridden. And then last fall, I was entirely bedridden. I could not walk. I couldn't read. I couldn't write. And it really felt like everything that I was, everything that I identified as had fallen away. And I was deeply, deeply depressed. And that's when I began an apprenticeship to storytelling, and really started coming into one of the acronyms for my illness. I have myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And one of the acronyms for it is systemic exertion intolerance disease. And so SEID is, and so Seidr, SEIDR, in the Norse tradition is women's oracular magic. And so when I saw that acronym, I was like, oh. Yeah. And I came across the story of Golvig, who was one of the goddesses that you held up when you were showing my deck.
With the heart, I think, right?
Yes, with the heart.
Yeah, you keep talking, I find her. Oh yeah, there she is.
Golvig is, she appears in the Voluspa, which is the sayings of the witch. It was a story told by a vulva, by a wise woman. And Golvig was kidnapped. She was a Vanir goddess, an earth goddess, who was kidnapped by the Aesir, and they burned her 3 times and stabbed her with spears. And the poem says, thrice burned, and yet she lives. And when she lives, she becomes heath, which is the root of the word heathen. Actually, it means bright, luminous. Golvig means gold drink. So she was this beverage, this golden beverage nectar. That then, yes, this nectar that then it infuses into being by her trial, by being burned 3 times. And it goes on to say that she travels the land teaching magic to sick women. The word is sometimes translated as wicked, but it also can mean sick. And I thought, whoa. So between the acronym, so that Seidr, that women's magic, which is magic that comes from potentially that thrice burning that Golvig goes through, and then this idea of initiation making us who we are. And that when we come out of initiation, we have a new role and we have gifts to bring forward. And I started to think about disability, because the word disability carries such a negative weight. But in my tradition, the Disir, the Dis means goddess. The Disir are the female ancestors of any lineage, and they are very invested in making sure that we fulfill our potential in this lifetime, and that we transform the weird for our children and our children's children. And so there was this synergy between the myth and the acronym and the magic and the Dis, and I thought, okay, what if this isn't disability, like I'm not able? What if it's disability? What if this whole thing is an initiation that actually is creating a new weird that is enabling me to become shining, to become powerful, to become a vulva, a witch, to become able to receive divine medicine? What if all of this stuff that we think we are has to be taken away by a death transition so that we can come into a new form? And that was when I decided that it needed to be so. And that's where I think that we forget that we have agency and choice in how we see the things that happen to us. And that is where the quote that you read at the very beginning of this interview about myth teaches us that. Myth teaches us that we have a choice, we have agency, we are able to see through the lens of myth these transitions as something that empower us and imbibe us with the magic that is universal, rather than the things that take us down and destroy us. And so in the very depths of my illness last fall, when I was I was in a dark room, I couldn't do anything. It really came together, and then miraculously, I healed. I had received treatment and I was on medication, and it was all very, scientific, this healing, but it came out the other side. Yeah. And so that's been a big part. I mean, I've had a couple of relapses. Chronic health issues are chronic. And here's the secret. Every single one of us will have this kind of initiation, and it will either come in the fullness of your life or at the end of your life. Almost all of us will die from a chronic illness. Yeah. That's something I learned. And so,
definitely all of us will die. And I think
yes,
this is also a great initiation for
100%. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, because it is like a small death in some way, because from what I, saw you shared, like you had to change your life, like 360 degrees. You had to move, you had to just like let go of all your things. You had to change your jobs. You had to wow. I was like, fuck. Yeah. How did she do it? I mean, and at the same time, there's like, you didn't know if it's going to be a happy end. And as you said, like you're still living with it. So it's not even that like suddenly you sprang out and nothing, like you still carry some of this, but that made you stronger in a way. That's the initiation that completed itself in some way or another, at least on this level. And then maybe it goes to another, but that's really beautiful. And I love how, like, not moralizing, like your style of working with illness. It's not this like, it will be all good, or like when you're sick, you don't fucking care if somebody's telling you this, like you really need to find strength in being in it. So could you explain a little bit more about what you meant, that this chronic illness is like this mindfulness practice? Like, how did you teach it? I mean, how did it teach you?
Well, it's brought me into absolute awareness that this is what we have. This is what we have. I mean, that is mindfulness. It's this moment right now, and it's everything in this moment. And, the thing about illness is that there's this desire. I was pushing against it, wanting to transcend it, just wanting to get back to where I was, just wanting to go back to teaching, go back to, school, go back to being in the world in the ways that I had always identified. But with everything stripped away, you realize that you have to find joy or peace with where you're at. And sometimes that's in the midst of tremendous pain. Sometimes that's, you can be suffering greatly, and you have to find a thread that keeps you present, even in the midst of that. And trusting the initiatory process, trusting that if it isn't your death, if you aren't moving toward that big transition, then you're moving into something else and it will change. And so how do we appreciate the moments where things are so hard? And that's where really coming into mindful awareness has been so helpful, because I can't cast forward. I don't know what the future brings. I don't know if I'm going to be this well tomorrow. I mean, it can change so quickly, and I can't cast back and feel regret for everything I lost. So I stay present. And, you know, that I have a weird practice. I just put that up on Patreon. Just a brief little weird meditation that I do every single day to try and root myself into the earth, align myself with the stars, and bring in my ancestors, my guardians, my guides to do any sort of repair necessary to keep me present here.
Yeah, I think I listened to it. I love the repairing the weird. That's really cool.
Yes.
I find it lovely. Like, yeah, weird can break, and you can like
We
sew
just
it up
sew
a
it
bit.
back up
It's
again.
cool.
Yeah,
I love that.
that's right.
It's like, yeah, actually true. That's life. And your new book that you're writing, it's about the dark goddess. And it's fascinating because, you know, there is this community which we were doing Walking with Mary, kind of trying to reclaim Mary as a goddess. And Hetien, who did the Mysteries of Mary Tarot, like she's actually working on the dark goddess tarot as well. And she's
I
done a
love
heap of
it.
research too. And so I was just wondering, I know that you're writing your books, handwriting, but can you tell us a little bit more about like why dark goddess and what you kind of writing about and what you put in it?
Yes, absolutely. So the Dark Goddess book. So in the Moon Divas guidebook, the goddesses that I originally was focused on, in the subsequent editions, I included more of, you know, the goddess is everything, right? I mean, the goddess is all. So, but there's this temptation to focus just on the light or the like beautiful or, but I really became in my initiation fascinated with the power of the dark goddess, and working specifically with the Norse goddess Hela, who I identify with as an ancestor, and who is, you know, she is the one that we will meet when we die. She is the one who will transform our souls into something else. And really being able to, I had a dream about her. She's half corpse, half human. And in the dream, I had my head on her bone knee, and she was stroking my hair with her bone hand. And I was just enthralled with the peace of that moment, that acceptance, because we're taught to just recoil and run from the dark goddess. And instead, what happens if we move toward her? And in initiation, in rites of passage, we have to move toward her because we will descend into the underworld. That is part of the journey. And we have to give an offering to the dark goddess in the underworld so that our initiation can be complete. And oftentimes that's giving up a role that we had or a kind of identity. And that can be in any initiation. I think of divorce as like a really great example of having to descend into the underworld and meet the dark goddess. So the book Dark Goddess is the sacred art of death transitions, which are the ones we've been talking about here, the initiations, and it's designed as a rite of passage process so that when you move through the work of the book, it's interactive in a workbook format like the Moon Divas guidebook. As you do the work of the book, you will be able to articulate your own initiatory process so that at the end of the book, you have a sense of that arc that you've been through or the spiral that you've moved through. And the content, I have a lot. It's very front loaded right now. I've worked through the first section, which is separation from the known, where in the initial phases of initiation, we move out of this conscious world and into that subterranean liminal underworld. Right now I'm working on the transition initiation section. So what happens in that liminal underworld and what kinds of practices can we invoke, or what threads can we pull from mythic consciousness to help anchor us even when we're in the midst of this dissolution. And then the third section will be return. What happens when we come back?
That's gorgeous. That reminds me, actually, I don't know if you know Melissa Lucia and her Oracle of Initiation, because she has done this amazing deck, Oracle of Initiation, when she actually, she done it after her husband. I have an interview with her as well. She has gone through this whole initiation process, meeting with the dark goddess when her husband died when she was young, and she just totally lost her identity. Who is she now? And just going through it. And she actually worked through like rituals. She was painting herself and dancing in the desert because she's from New Mexico, and taking selfies, even though the word selfie didn't exist yet, you know, she was just like taking shots of herself. And she was by herself totally. It was a total like ritual for her to go through these different stages. And she has this amazing deck. You can take a look at my IG if you like. You will definitely see it at some point. There's like this different with faces and with light, you know, it's kind of her face, but she took it to this kind of archetypal level. And yeah, it's a really amazing deck. So that's just reminded me the stages of initiation, which, yeah, that's really amazing.
A perfect example too of exactly, I mean, that is, you know, when I say art saved me, that's what I mean, is that in those processes, these are, it's such an opportunity. Creation is an opportunity for integration.
Totally.
And,
yeah.
We can become through what we create in that time. And then we also have evidence at the end that that's what happens, because, you know, so often we go through initiation and it's not marked by anything. We don't have ceremony, we don't have art, we just kind of blob through it.
Yeah. We miss ritual. I think that's anchoring. It's really anchoring into the present as well. And you kind of, for a sec, out of that thinking mind. Nothing wrong with thinking mind, but we like so much in it. And I think because our culture really encourages that, you know, I catch myself all the time. I'm like, you don't have to be so efficient like this, you know, provide, make videos, do, share, photo, food, like, oh, you just go, fuck, just slow. Take a moment. Don't share that.
Yes. Right.
It's mad. Like, it's mystery. Like, it not everything has to be put out, you know. But at the same time, I know how inspiring that is, and like, I'm glad that we share and that we have community to share with. But yeah, like it can catch up with you and you just go, oh, okay, this is mine. You know, this is a private moment. Like, I don't need to put everything on social media. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I think we're going to slowly wrap up, because remember our previous conversation.
Yes, I do. I remember.
Even though I have still many questions, but I think I'm just going to let go of them now. And I hope everybody, who listens to it, can take whatever they want to as an inspiration. And then I will link all the links to your work, to your website, to your Patreon, to your IG, where people can find a lot of free resources if they are able to, can support you, so that you can keep writing your Dark Goddess book and keep sharing your amazing, offerings with us. And thank you for being, Lara.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here and for this connection. I love it.
Yeah, me too. And I'm so glad we did it. And hopefully it was, definitely it was the perfect timing. But I hope maybe we'll find out about it in the comments, or maybe people will share some, oh my God, I so needed this today.
Yes.
I'm just hoping for it, because we were trying for so long and finally it happened. So thank you everyone for watching. Bye, Lara. And I speak to you soon, guys. Bye.